Well, Charlene, it is a thrill to have you here. And I know we were talking in the pre-prep as to how we had originally met each other, but I really am excited, especially after reading all your LinkedIn posts and reading your book or listening to your book, but we'll talk about those in a second. Let's start a little bit with your background. And you've been in comms leadership in a number of positions at really well-known companies like Raytheon and Bechtel. What initially got you interested in getting into the field of communications?
Gosh, 1981. I'm a freshman in college, and I decide that I am going to be a teacher, that I was called to be a teacher. Now, one thing to understand is that, I grew up in what I kind of call the ghetto's ghetto in Oakland. So the only people of authority that I saw that were professionals were teachers and bus drivers. So I had decided that I was going to be a teacher. And I ran into somebody that I knew from high school on the college campus. Those are the days you applied to one school,
Yep.
and hopefully you got in. It was your state school, and hopefully you got in. And I ran into this guy, and he said, "Hey, what are you studying?" And I said, "Oh, I'm going to study education. I'm going to be a teacher." And he says, "Oh, I don't know if you would be good at that." And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he says, I just don't know that you're going to make a lot of money at that. And at that point, at the height of my mother's career, she made $17,000 a year. And so I thought, as long as I could make 25, I'd be okay, right? That was my thinking. And but then I said, well, maybe I should rethink this. And so then I decided this is all in like a day. Okay. So then I decided that I wanted to be, and I've always wanted to be a psychologist, a clinical psychologist. I still want to be a clinical psychologist. And so I was talking with my advisor about that. And she said, "Oh, I don't think that's a good idea for you." And I said, "Why?" And she says, "Well, you're 17 years old." I started college at 17. She says, "You're 17 years old and you look 12. And that's not going to serve you very well because people will think you haven't had the life experience." And that actually made some sense to me. So then she said, "Why don't you take a communications class?" And I said, "Okay, why not? I'm 17. What do I know about life? I didn't even know what college was, quite frankly, when I decided to go. And so I went to my first journalism course, and it was love at first letter. And I never looked back. It was just, I had to write something, I had to research something, and I tell you what, it was like I have found my calling in life.
Well,
I've never questioned it um, until 35 years later.
Well, it seems like you had a good run at it. Worth a side note because you find this out in the book that we will talk about in a minute. Charlene was also an NFL cheerleader, so talk about like a different, different opportunities and different necks of the woods. Uh, and if you do watch this on YouTube, you'll see like why she has, like I was telling you up front, a beautiful countenance and an aura about her. So I can totally see her in both of those roles. Uh, One of the things that I do want to talk about, and that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show, is beyond you being a quality human being, is that you tell amazing stories on LinkedIn, and we'll talk more about that. And second, I am exploring this different types of influence on the show. And so while you do have a number of followers and you've influenced a number of people and you've written a book, you don't have millions of followers on Instagram or LinkedIn. But one of the things that intrigued me, and I a lot of things connected once I realized this, that one of your roles over the course of your career was to be the chairman of the Page Society. Now, I'm going to tell people a little bit about Page Society, or I'm going to let you tell us, but it is maybe one of the most influential organizations in the US that you've never heard about unless you work in the role of communications, almost like this secret handshake society.
Right.
And so I'd love for you to tell a little bit more. And obviously, as a organization of chief communications officers, guess what chief communication officers get to do? They are usually the right-hand person for the CEO or the chairman. And I know you've been in that role a number of times. So tell us a little bit more about the Page Society and what you did and what the role was in building on what I just said, why it's so important.
Sure, sure. So the Page Society, as you said, is I don't even want to say one of, it is the most influential organization for top level communications professionals. So in order to qualify for page membership, not only do you have to be the most senior communications executive, the company also has to be a certain size. So when you think about Fortune 50, Fortune 500, sometimes down to the Fortune 1000 companies, the head of the communications for those organizations, whether they're B2B or B2C, those are the people who qualify to be members of the Page Society. So it is a hugely influential group. Almost everybody reports into the CEO or to the chairman. So you talk about having your finger on the pulse of what's happening. And what I like to say is when you reach that point where you can join and be accepted, because not everybody who applies is accepted, but when you reach that point where you can be accepted into the Page Society, um, not only have you made it, this is when you have crossed over to be a business person first and a communicator second, right? Which to me is the echelon when you're not at the table simply because you are fantastic in communications. You're at the table because you've become a respected and valued business person whose specialty is communications. Page is worldwide. It's a global organization. We don't take stances on a lot of things, but we are always paying attention to what's going on and advising our membership. You know, we're seeing something that now we call these CCO plus, which increasingly CCOs are taking on more and more and more responsibility. So we want to make sure that those CCOs are prepared to be able to do that. You know, and there are a number of other organizations that are CCOs or that bring CCOs or senior communicators together. We're the only organization that brings you together to make you an even better CCO. So when you're looking at companies like Walmart, like Amazon, I'm using consumer brands because that's what people are most familiar with. You know, Target. You think about Twitter, Reddit, all of these organizations. Those CCOs are the people who are accepted into the membership. I've been fortunate to be a member of the Page Society since 2009. And even though I had been a CCO for large companies prior to that, I did not qualify for membership. So it wasn't until 2009 that I qualified for membership. And I would say since then, I've either been on the board and the executive committee, as well as other committees. And then at the end of 2019, I was voted in as chair for 2020, which was an amazing time to be the chair of the Page Society because people are looking to you for guidance. And if you think about what was going on then, we had COVID, we had George Floyd, we had the economy, we had so many things going on, and communicators, CCOs, were trying to figure out how am I advising, my chairman and my board. And I got to sit atop the most influential organization at that time. And I think it was kismet, it was divine intervention in order to be, to have a Black woman at the helm at that time. And I may actually be the first Black woman chair of Page. And then of course I was then also nominated into a second term. You can't serve more than 2 terms. But it was really both a fantastic experience from the standpoint of what I was able to gain from the members, but also what I was able to give and to share because my unique lived experience became very real and very important at that time.
And oh, what a unique and lived experience Charlene has witnessed, which is a good segue to the next question that I want to talk about. Is you wrote this amazing book. It's called You
Yes.
Are Enough, Reclaiming
Mhm.
Your Career and Your Life with Purpose, Passion, and Unapologetic Authenticity. So love the
Yeah.
title, by the way.
Thank
So
you.
tell us about this collection. It's personal stories of your cancer journey, breaking
Mhm.
through glass ceilings, feeling invisible, and sort of how you help people not feel invisible. And then you share a number of really important business lessons, which I would argue you could apply to both business and or life. Can you share a few of those lessons with us?
Yeah, so just to start out a bit with writing the book, people ask me all the time, how long had you planned to write the book, et cetera. I didn't have any preconceived notions about writing a book. But when I found, in the midst of my cancer journey, and discovered that I would not be going back to work in that capacity, I remembered that as recent as 10 years ago, I had gone to a luncheon where you have a panel of accomplished women and they're talking about their experience and their climb up the ladder. And to be quite honest, they were all lying, right? Nobody was, or at least um, toning it down, right? Because they all worked for somebody and you needed to go back to that job. Well, I was in the enviable position that I didn't work for anybody at the time. So I decided to write a book that was real and that was true and that told the stories, the positive and and the negative. And there's a part when I'm introducing the book that I say, I feel like as someone who has been, underrated, you know, um, biased against, but at the same time celebrated, throughout my career, having gone through all of this, that I had a responsibility to tell people what it really was like. And it was like being invisible when you are a female and I'm a minority female, and God forbid you be attractive at the same time. And then also having your history that you were an NFL cheerleader, all of that adds up to not, wow, I can't wait to meet her. It adds up to an empty suit that should be ignored, right? So, as though you didn't have enough to work against, you're fighting against that as well, right? And I'll tell you something, and I can't remember if this is in the book or not, but because I've always worked in defense organizations, I would have former generals send me in interoffice mail my formal picture as a cheerleader, with a note asking me to sign it and send it back to them, like for their nephew or for themselves or whatever. But if I saw them in a meeting, they wouldn't even acknowledge me, right? It was like I was a non person. And my deal always was, I'll sign it and I'd send a note back. And I said, I have signed this for you, but my expectation is that you will keep this to yourself. Because it wasn't until I left corporate that I even would start talking about the fact that I was a cheerleader, and it's just, you have the experiences, and people think that these things don't happen, but they happen every single day of, somebody talking over you, or, you've had that experience where you've been networking and the person that you're talking to is looking around you to see if there's somebody more important to talk to. Now, if you just think about that, how do you think you're making the person that you're talking to feel? Right? And this is in the workplace. So what are you doing to their psyche bit by bit, over and over and over again? You know. And I remember, and then I'll stop telling stories and give you a chance to ask questions. But one of the organizations that I worked for, I was in the DC area, but the business unit was headquartered in Texas, and so a lot of the leadership, except for me and maybe three others, were in Texas. And there was one gentleman who he was in Texas. I was really fond of him. We had become friends. We talked, not friends like guys become friends, right? We weren't playing golf and drinking beer, but at least, we were friendly, etc. And so I hadn't seen him for a while, and we had a networking event, before a big meeting, right? And so I see him, and I can't remember his name now, but let's just say his name was Todd. And I see him, and I'm like, Todd, oh my gosh, it's so great to see you. I haven't seen you in so long. And he says to me, Aaron, Shaniqua, how are you? And
Are you effing kidding me?
I wish I was. I wish I could make this up. And I stopped and I said, what did you just call me? And he goes, Shaniqua. I was like, who the hell is Shaniqua? My name is Charlene. And, but I tell you, Aaron, that told me everything I needed to know about him. We weren't friends, right? I don't know what I was to him, but we weren't friends, and certainly, I'm not going to give my friend an ethnic name,
No,
right?
I
What would
mean,
be considered an ethnic name just because she's an ethnic person, right? I mean,
it.
and that shit happens oh, I'm sorry, I shouldn't curse.
No, you can swear on this show. I make sure I check the box that says this is not for kids.
Yeah, because I should say I like love to curse. My mother, thank goodness she has passed away, because she would be just beside herself if she was cursing, or for people with limited vocabulary. But I just love it. But anyway, but and when things like that happen, right? Then you're saying to yourself, okay, there's another person in power who doesn't see me, right? And last week there was that person who didn't see me, and 2 days ago there was that person who didn't see me. And so, just getting back to my book, the name of my book is really on purpose, right? It's the You Are Enough piece, because so many of us spend an incredible amount of time trying to prove that we are enough, right? And I don't even know what the definition of that is, quite frankly. And then the other piece of it is reclaiming your career and your life, which is basically reclaiming yourself with purpose, passion, and unapologetically, right? Why do we have to apologize for who we are, right? And just assume that we're not good enough, for who? For what? I don't
Crazy.
know.
Well, this does lead into my next question, which
Okay.
is it's strangely sort of related to what you just said, but almost like in a heartbreaking way. So at the beginning of the book, you were mentioning you're from Oakland. You
Hmm.
talk about the fact that your dad was an alcoholic and
Hmm.
abusive, and so I would encourage people to listen or read the book. Charlene does read the audiobook, so it's really fun to hear it in her voice. But you talk about seeing your dad at you were age 21, and you were seeing him for the first time in 11 years. And you mentioned that he came up to you and looked at you, so he didn't call you Shaniqua. I guess that was like a
Right. Yeah,
plus.
I guess that's positive, right? But Black
But
people rarely do make those mistakes, by the
yeah,
way.
yeah, I'm sure. But this is the thing that's like so heartbreaking is he told you looked familiar and asked if you had ever met before. I mean, I can't, when I heard that, Charlene, I could not even believe like the level of heartbreak that just must have caused. Now, the positive on this, and this is not what I want to dwell on, is in the book you conversely talk and you mentioned her that your mother has been such an inspiration. She left your dad. She went out, I think she worked 2 or 3 jobs. She had you and your 3 brothers. Um, Tell us a little bit more about your mom. She just sounds like such an amazing person.
Yeah. So I'll start with the story about my dad, since that's what you brought up. So my dad, when my parents divorced, I was 7, and my mother left my father, who was abusive, because I had gotten very sick. And the doctors could not figure out why I was in and out of the hospital until they ultimately said to her, it's stress, and
Mm,
she needs to be out of her stressful environment. Now, that was a bit of foreshadowing for the rest of my life, but I didn't know that at the time. So my brothers all had a choice as to who they want to live with, my mom or my dad, and they chose my dad. I did not have that choice, which was fine with me. I spent one summer with my dad, and I came back that summer and asked my mother if I could never go again. And so she agreed. And so the next time I saw him was at my brother's wedding, and I was kind of the host, telling people where to go or this or that. And he walks up and he says to me, "Hi," and I said, "Hello." And of course, I knew exactly who he was.
Right.
And he says, you look really familiar. Have we met before? And I just said, yes, I'm your daughter. And I walked away
I was going to say,
because
was he at least a little humiliated? Because I can't even imagine.
probably not.
Mm,
Probably not. So it was just telling, wasn't it? But
yeah.
there's people say that, and they joke, girls who have daddy issues, right? You know, there's nothing funny about daddy issues because
No.
they are based in like serious shit, right? So I just have to kind of say that. And but my mom was amazing. She was absolutely amazing.
Fearless, it
In
sounds like.
Oh my gosh, so fearless. Worked two jobs, Unfortunately, that meant that I was like the latchkey kid. But I was also very shy, so I didn't ever do anything that I wasn't supposed to. I didn't date until I went to college, So I was beyond a good girl. Of course, part of it is I graduated from high school at 16, so I hadn't even reached puberty yet. So the idea of dating was like, well, why would I want to do that? So anyway, it all kind of worked out. But my mother was just the epitome of strength and sacrifice, for me. And she died at 58 on the operating table having her second heart transplant.
Ugh. And you tell the story in the book, which is crazy, but again, very like touching and lots of emotional moments in the book. So I highly encourage people to read and listen to it.
Yeah, there are. And she is one of the reasons that I work so hard is because I just can't help but believe that, that I am her legacy. And, whenever I get down or say, oh, I just don't feel like doing this today, it's like, look at what your mother gave up, right? And in
Mm.
essence, shortened her life so that I could have a life. And that's not lost on me ever.
Well, it's amazing perspective because I don't know as though take those we take some of those things for granted sometimes. So
Mhm.
it's encouraging to hear, when people realize that. I do want to shift gears a little bit, and this is staying with the book, but it's getting into another one of the lessons. And so I'm a geek with these things called
Mhm.
distinctions. I have a executive coach named Milo that really leaned into distinctions. And one of the distinctions you made in the book that struck me was talking about the difference between a mentor and a
Ah,
champion. And I think
right.
mentor in general feels pretty positive, and you don't say in the book that it's not, but it was really, I think it's one of the most valuable pieces of advice that you provide in the book. And there's a lot of it. So I'll stop talking and let you tell us a little bit more about that distinction.
Yeah. So I love mentors, and they certainly have their place. Um, but not all mentorship is good. And I know people are going to be like, oh, who would ever say that? So when you think about it, a mentor is someone typically in your organization who helps you figure out how to get things done in that organization. And all of that is very positive. Where that can start to go negative is when that mentor starts encouraging you to be like everyone else instead of being who you are and figuring out, how to work within the system. So initially, they help you say, okay, this is the rules, but this is how we really get things done, right? But sometimes that can turn into, oh, well, you can't talk like that. You have to talk like this, right? And it's harmless, but it ultimately starts to turn you into this part of this culture, which is the opposite of authenticity. Now, a champion, on the other hand, who often is also in the company, the champion is the person who is going to make room for your voice to be heard. right? They are the person who is going to bring up your name in rooms that you will never be invited into and in conversations that you'll never have a participate that you'll never participate in. And so you have to think about this. Well, yes, having a mentor is great. A mentor is going to kind of keep you straight and all this. A champion, a champion is how you're going to grow your career, your influence, how you're going to be seen. Because when the executives are in that meeting and they're thinking about who's getting the promotion, who's going to get this job, who's going to do this, you need to have someone in that room that says, well, what about Charlene? Have we thought about her for this role? Right. And chances are 9 times out of 10, the other people in the room have not. Right. But this person is the one who's going to say, I've seen how she leads. I've seen how she thinks. And yes, it's very different from what we're used to, but I think she can really bring something to this role. And once that person says that, they're going to stand behind you and help to make sure that you're successful. So mentors, absolutely. But if you want to get ahead, you need champions. Full stop. You need a champion.
Well, it's smart. And I think, again, I mentioned business lessons and life lessons. I think we all could
Yeah.
use a champion or champions in our life. And it sounds like your mom was certainly one of those to you. One of the things, and I think you obviously are a champion to a lot of people for a
Mhm.
variety of reasons. And one of the things that struck me is that toward the end of the book, you talk about a friend who I think was, reading a draft of the book,
Mhm.
telling you
Mhm.
that they were reading the book and that your vulnerability really helped them. And so what I'd love to know is, I'm guessing your book and your talks, because you give a lot of like keynote talks
Mhm.
to numerous people, have impacted a lot of people. Can you share a story or two of people that you've impacted?
Yeah, if I start with the story that I tell in the book. So this is someone that I have had mentored for a long time. And in
Hmm.
fact, she told me one day that she never wore heels to work until I started
Wow,
working at that company because
that's
women
right.
never wore heels. And I thought, what do you mean women don't wear heels? What do you wear? I mean, I don't know because I only wear heels. So, but we were having dinner one night and she had said to me, she actually read an early draft of my book, and she was nearly in tears when she was telling me this story. And she said, Charlene, I look at you and you have everything together, and I just think that you are amazing. She says, and when I read that you hurt and that you doubt yourself and that sometimes you cry all the way home from work. She goes, I felt so much better because I knew there wasn't something wrong with me. And I thought that if Charlene can feel this, then that means I'm okay. Right. And that was so powerful. And she really fueled my need to be authentic kind of all the time in what I write and what I put out there. And one of my mantras is it's choice, not chance, that changes everything. And in every keynote, regardless of the title of the keynote or who I'm talking to, that is always a central point because we don't realize that we lock ourselves into chance rather than choice. And I gave a talk it was one of my first big talks actually at the US Air Force Academy. And I gave my talk, and afterward someone came up to me and she said, I've had a choice that I needed to make. And it wasn't until today that I realized it was my choice.
Hmm. I love that.
You. She says, I know that I have a choice to make. And I said, absolutely. I said, and why would we leave our lives, our health, our relationships, our careers, everything to chance? Why would we do that? Right? And the only reason for doing that is because you don't have the belief in yourself. And that's where the you are enough piece comes in, right? But it truly is, if you think about it, it is choice, not chance, that changes your life. So what choices are you going to make?
Well, it's another great distinction for those keeping track because that it's a very powerful statement. Just tactically, because I
Mhm.
know that depending on where people buy it, sort of does different things for the author. Where would you like people to go and buy the book?
Oh, you can buy the book on Amazon, which is great. The advantage of buying it on Amazon is when you leave a review, which, by the way, those are gold to authors. They're better than money to an author. You can buy it on Amazon. And you can also reach out to me and you can buy it for me. That doesn't mean you can't leave a review on Amazon. What you get when you do buy the book for me is I always make sure that I autograph the book, but autographing the book for me is not signing my name. It's giving you a note in your book, in the book as well. So either way, it works for me. What's important to me is that you read the book. And though I give, I think, something about 13 different lessons in the book, I also chronicle my cancer journey because there are parallels to what I needed to learn at work that helped me through my cancer journey, such as learn how to advocate for yourself, right? You have to do that at work. You really, really have to do that in healthcare. And I'll give you a great example. Um, After I had surgery first, and so this is how my mind works, right? The doctors said, the oncologist and the breast surgeon, they said you need to have chemo and you need to have surgery, and it doesn't matter which one you have first, but that's what gets started. And I said, well, whichever one of you can come up with an opening first, that's the one I'm going to do. Right. And so the surgeon had an opening first, and she made an opening actually. So I had surgery. I would tell you that if you have breasts and don't have a reason to have them both cut off, don't ever do that because that's, I actually had my 10th cancer related surgery last week. Right. So this just goes on and on and on. But when it came time for chemo, I went to an oncologist, and she said, chemo is kind of optional for you. Right. And I said, well, wait, I had stage 2 cancer metastasized to my lymph nodes. How in the world is chemo an option? She said, well, it's kind of, 50-50. If you don't want to go through the tragedy of kind of losing your hair, which, by the way, is not a vanity issue, it is very much a mental issue, and getting sick and all of those things, just go straight to radiation. Don't worry about it. And so I thought, well, that's weird. So I got all of my files together and I sent them to MD Anderson Cancer Center, and I asked them about it. And the doctor came back to me and he said, without chemo, you have a greater than 50% chance that your cancer will come back. Right. And I thought, well, thank goodness I got that second opinion. And so
Yeah.
then, you know what I did after that? I got a third opinion. Right. and and they came back and said the same thing. Right. So of course I had chemo, because why would I want to take that kind of chance to have it come back? And I mentioned that specifically around healthcare because, and I've had a friend die just for this reason, is people say, I don't want to get a second opinion because I don't want to start a pissing fight between my doctors and this and that. Okay, two things. One, we are talking about your life, all right? Not just, a toe. We are talking about your life. And secondly, if you have a doctor that's going to get pissed off because you got a second opinion, you need a new doctor,
Yeah,
because
for
your
sure.
doctor should be willing for you to do anything and everything to satisfy yourself about what kind of treatment you're going under. And I had a friend who, she was diagnosed with cancer, and I talk to a lot of people with cancer, as you can imagine, now, and I keep myself very open to that. And if anybody out there, if you have been diagnosed with cancer or someone close to you has, and you just have questions or fears or whatever, call me. I will make myself available to you. But I had a friend who was diagnosed with cancer, and she's telling me about her treatment. And I said, I'm not a medical professional, but I'm going to tell you, you've been misdiagnosed, right? And you really need to go get a second opinion. And she said, I'm in this small town and, I just don't want to create this pissing war. And I said, you know what? You don't even have to go to the appointment. Just get your files and send them. Find out who your hospital or who your doctor has a relationship and send them. And she didn't want to do it. By the time I finally convinced her to do it, she went into hospice the next day
Oh my
and
gosh.
she died. Now, here's a different story. My vet, I love my vet. She is a alternative vet, when you want your dog to get, herbs and acupuncture. That's my vet. My vet was diagnosed with cancer, and and she called me, and she lives in a small town. They said you need to have surgery, and she was very concerned because as a vet, you deal with big animals, and she wouldn't be able to pick up animals, and it all led basically to her retirement, right? 10 years earlier than any of us are ready to, which means financially we're not ready. So she was quite emotional about it. And I said, take your files, find out who your hospital has an association with, send them your files and see what they tell you. And she goes, you think? I said, yes, I think. She sent her files. It happened to be MD Anderson that her hospital had a relationship with. And they came back and said, surgery is not the standard of care for you. You don't need to have surgery. This is the protocol for your treatment. She went through the protocol. It's been more than 6 years. She's fine. And she's been able to keep her practice and, keep her business going. It changed her life.
Well,
It's
what,
choice, not chance, that
right.
changes you.
No, and what an amazing advocate you are to do that. So thank you for sharing that story or those stories. I do want to talk a little bit more about helping people because clearly you're
Mhm.
doing it in a number of ways. But you and I also talked a little bit about the fact that you're a big supporter of the American Cancer Society and the United Network for Organ Sharing, UNOS or UNOS, I think because of your mom. So tell us a little bit about your involvement with both.
So, with UNOS, I am primarily a financial contributor for them, and it is all around the fact that when we go, when we die, most of us have organs that we don't need, and that can save someone else's life. Now, for my mother, her first transplant only lasted a year, and then her second transplant, she died on the table, but even that extra year of life was invaluable. And so I am stunned, with the exception of for religious reasons. I am really stunned for people about people who don't donate their organs because it is your last opportunity to give, right? It is literally your last opportunity to give. And so why wouldn't you?
No, right.
Right. Yeah, again, I exclude people who have the religious beliefs that don't believe in that. I'm not trying to test that in any way, but we all want to leave the world better than when we got here. And if you are like an asshole your entire life, but you donate your organs at the end, you've done something really good, right? I'm not
Maybe you
going to
have a
say
shot at the pearly gates at that point still,
yeah,
right?
I don't know. I think Peter can be pretty tough when you get to those pearly gates.
Yeah,
But
I'm sure.
make your last gift, your last act, a gift. So that's how I feel about that. And I think that um, you know, gosh, cancer's so complicated. It is just so complicated. And so this year for 2025 I am one of their faces of hope, which I'm happy to do. I am not a believer. I have to be honest, I'm not a believer in what I call the pinkening of America, right?
Yep.
So
Yep.
that's just not my thing. But my thing is helping people to not have to make that walk alone. And it doesn't matter if I know you or not. And I've had people that I've known on text only because they're going through something. And I want to be that voice of reason. I want to say, here are the things to ask your doctor, and here's how to ask those questions so that you get the right answer. Don't be afraid to do this. Hey, you're going into chemo. No one's going to tell you this, but your bones are going to ache, and take a Claritin beforehand. Nobody knows why it works, but it does, right? Think about neuropathy. I have a certain group of pictures in my phone that are hidden, of course. But when someone tells me, I'm going in for a bilateral mastectomy, I will send them a picture and I'll say, this is what you should expect coming out, right? Because you have no idea, right?
Right.
People don't go through that more than once, or they say, I'm afraid about being in the chemo chair. And I'll say, see if you can get a private room, right? Find a schedule where you may be able to get a private room. Here are the things that you want to have with you, right? Um, you're going to have a lot of visitors. Limit your visitors, because it becomes about you making your visitors feel okay, not the other way around. And you need that energy reserved for yourself. So when it comes to cancer, I give in a lot of ways, some not always so obvious. Um, I just recently wrote a post about grace, about giving, if you are a cancer survivor, giving yourself some grace, because we don't always do that. And
Well,
it's critical.
it's a great post. I did read it, and thank you for sharing that story and all that you do for cancer and the organ pep talk.
Mhm.
This last one is related. This is the last sort of serious question. Then we'll get to some more lighthearted questions. Well, three
Okay.
lighthearted, one serious. Um, but I know when I think you and I met online a few years back, and
Mhm.
recently I'd really been struck by a number of your LinkedIn posts, but one in particular, and I'm just going to paint the picture here. It started, I went to a KKK rally, not to protest, but to see for myself. So I'm going to just say that, Charlene, not everyone can get away with a post on LinkedIn that starts with going to a KKK rally. Can you finish the story for our listeners?
Yes. So my husband of 34 years, at the time we were dating, and I had just recently moved here. I'm from Albuquerque, New Mexico, originally, and I had just recently moved here. And one Saturday, I open up the paper, the Washington Post, and I see that there is a KKK rally downtown. And being from Albuquerque, the KKK exists because you hear about it, but you've never seen it. And it's kind of like, does that really exist today in 1990? I don't know if this is real. But I look at my husband and I said, you know what, honey? Every KKK rally needs an interracial couple. We've got to go. And he's like, okay. So so we went downtown to this KKK rally, and it turned out that there were so many counter protesters that they didn't actually get to march very far. And so they had to stay. It was on Constitution Avenue. So they kind of had to stay where they had their dais, but they had on their hoods. And I think the Grand Poobah, or whatever they call them, is in purple, and they were up there and they were spewing hate, and spewing all of these racial slurs. And I thought, that much hate really does exist in the world. But I had to see it, for myself. I didn't, and yeah, seeing like snipers on the buildings, and, uh, and there were way more counter protesters, but there were supporters as well, and you're looking at these people, and I mean, they didn't look like me, but a lot of them look like my husband, right? And I'm trying to hold this together and understand. Um, and I've never gotten to a point of understanding, and I never regretted going to that rally, not ever. And at some point, I don't know if a gun went off or if it was a firework or something like that. I don't know. But at one point, the entire crowd turned and started running the other direction, meaning they
Wow.
were running toward me. And thank goodness for my fiance then, now husband, he had jumped out of the way and then literally pulled me out of the crowd. But it was also the first time that I saw how people get trampled, because I'm always thinking when you hear people got trampled, I'm always thinking, why didn't you just get out of the way? Right?
Right.
But
Right.
it's not that simple. But yes, I went to a KKK rally in 1990.
Well, like I said, that was, if I hadn't been hooked already, reading that, I was like, this is a woman that I need to sit down with and talk because she is a baller. Um, I do want to do a few lighthearted questions, or like I said, three lighthearted, one sort of less lighthearted, and then we'll wrap up because I know we're close on time. But I'm really curious because of the fact that you said you like to talk dirty or use dirty words, I should say,
I
not talk dirty.
didn't say dirty, I said
That's right.
curse.
Curse. That's right. That's right. Good distinction. One more distinction. But this is a fun one I ask all my guests, and I'm always curious to hear how they respond. So, what is the dirtiest sounding word that isn't actually a dirty word? Like spatchcock is the example I give.
Gamecock.
Gamecock. That's a good one. No one has used gamecock yet. So, sorry for, what is it, South Carolina that are the Gamecocks? Yeah.
Yeah, I was in New York once, and I don't know what we're playing. I don't know who they were playing or why they were in New York, but like half the crowd was yelling "Go," and the other half was yelling "Cox," and the other was saying "Go." And I was like, and you can guess which group I joined, right?
Yes, of course.
But it was hilarious. I think that's one. I think that's
That's
absolutely.
that's a great one, and that's a great illustration of what that is. So, thank you for adding on to that. Um, you've probably had a chance to meet a lot of famous people over the course of your life. Who has impressed you the most?
It's funny when I thought about this question, it was easier for me to come up with who had impressed me the least.
Mm.
But I will tell you, I was
You can
in.
answer it that way, by the way. I'm totally okay with it. Who impressed you the
Oh,
least?
who impressed me the least? Willem Dafoe.
Oh, really? That's
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. For one thing, he's this big. Okay.
Okay. And for those can't see it, Charlene's holding up her fingers and showing about 3 inches. So,
Yeah, so well, I say I'm 5'6". I'm not, but I say I'm 5'6". I'm a little shorter than that. And when I met Willem Dafoe, I'm taller than he is, right? And I mean, he was just like this little thing I met him actually in Alamogordo, New Mexico, at the Air Force Range there. And which, if you're from New Mexico, you call it Alamo Nowhere, right? And he was, I think, filming a movie, and I was doing some kind of training session for my company at the time. And I ran into him and I was like, oh, wow, okay, you're Willem Dafoe.
Charlene is looking down right now, like she's looking on top of his head.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting this is audio.
No, it's all good. It's just helping with the color commentary here.
Yeah. But one of the most impressive, and I met him twice, is Martin Sheen. Oh my
Oh,
God.
I know there are a lot
Amazing.
of people that wish, for those that have not ever watched, he was the president on a show called West Wing, which is probably
Yeah.
one of the best shows, irrespective of your political leaning, because of the acting and the way they address things. So I'm glad
Beautiful.
to hear that. I'm not surprised to hear that.
He was amazing. The first time I met him was very briefly because I was in New York and he was walking by and I was like, "Oh my gosh, has anybody ever told you that you look like Martin Sheen?" And he said,
My
"That's because
mom.
I am Martin Sheen."
I love it.
And
I
then
love
the
it.
next time I saw him was at a very intimate dinner, and he talked about how he regretted changing his name from Estevez to Sheen because as he aged, he realized what a slight that was to his father.
Yeah, I can only imagine.
Yeah, it was great. And Anna Wintour was pretty fabulous too, but only because of the way she was dressed.
Yeah. Well, and for those that don't know, Charlene is absolutely a fashionista, if I can say that word. All right, last two questions. So this one's a little heavier, and we'll keep it quick because, again, I know both of us are running close on time here. So, one regret in your life.
One regret. When I was sick, when I had cancer, I put on a very brave face for my daughters all of the time. And I hugely regret that because it was an opportunity to show them that it was okay to be vulnerable. And because I was always strong, they felt that they had to be. So they never cried in front of me. They never showed anything other than strength. And I think I robbed them of a really important life lesson.
Wow, that's really profound. So thank you for sharing that one. And I guess I wouldn't have ever thought of that, but that actually makes a ton of sense. We'll end on a sort of lighter, happier note.
Mhm.
And I'm also curious to hear because you shared some bands and music during the book. Name one
Mhm.
band or artist you wish you had seen in concert that you didn't get a chance to.
Because they're no longer here with us.
Ideally, yes.
Um, well, some of them might still be around. AC/DC.
I think they
Are
do
they
tour,
still
but I
around?
don't know how many of the original members are with them, and they're all like 75, so probably wouldn't be quite as exciting to
Yeah.
see.
Yeah, that would be like seeing the Rolling Stones where you couldn't really enjoy it because you'd be afraid that one of them was just going to fall over and die, right? So, but AC/DC, what I would give in their heyday to hear them sing Highway to Hell, Give the Dog a Bone, and Back in Black. Oh my goodness. It would be amazing.
So, two things as we end. One, I actually got a chance to do that very thing. I saw them in
Oh,
1984 at the Worcester Centrum in their heyday.
oh my
And
God, I'm so
if I
jealous.
didn't already love you enough, I love you maybe 10% more knowing that you're an ACDC fan, Charlene.
Yes, I love AC/DC, but right now I'm all about Jelly Roll.
Oh, that's a
Today,
good one. Talk about,
oh,
again, opposite ends of the spectrum. Jelly Roll,
right,
very different
right,
than ACDC. Yes.
exactly. But I listen, I have dance parties every morning in my house with my dogs. And lately it's been Jelly Roll. And I tell you what, he's amazing. You talk about a storyteller, now his rap stuff, that's crap.
Yeah.
But, his ballads hit you at your soul. He is
Yeah.
amazing.
It's a perfect way to describe it. So, on that note, we will
Yeah.
wrap things up. Charlene, thank you so much for sharing all of these amazing stories. And it's lovely to spend this time with you. And I hope the listeners enjoy the conversation as much as I did.
Yeah, well, I enjoyed it and you enjoyed it. So there you go. We have a win.
That's all
Win-win,
that
right?
counts, right? All right. Thank
Thank
you,
you so
Charlene.
much. I
Yeah.
appreciate the connection. All right.